The seller insisted on staying home during all showings, him and 4 dogs. And I forgot to mention that one of the rooms where they let the dogs run, I guess, had dried urine. With the market shifting right now, many sellers are really concerned about leaving any money on the table with their listings. And with more and more discerning buyers in the market, it's making it harder and harder for sellers to feel confident about the activity they're getting on their listings. So I made this video to ensure that you feel comfortable that you've done all that you can to your listing to get top dollar and ensure that you get the most activity on your listing possible. It never fails. Every time I go on a listing appointment, the sellers always want to try to get what their neighbor got last week, last month, or sometimes even as far back as last year. So I think it's first important to talk about whether or not we are in a seller's market or a buyer's market. The answer is neither. We're actually in a shifting market. So let's talk a little bit about what a shifting market actually is and what that means for you as a seller. Our market in Las Vegas is definitely shifting, and it's shifting quickly towards a buyer's market, but we aren't quite there yet. Regardless to whether or not we're in a buyer's market, a seller's market, or a shifting market, we are definitely in a very unique market here at this time and place. We still have way too little inventory for our market to be considered a buyer's market. And sellers, your commodity is your listing. And if we're in a shortage of your commodity, we can't really consider it a buyer's market. I think the biggest reason why people are starting to interpret it as a buyer's market is because a lot of sellers feel that as the market is sliding, they're having to be more realistic with the pricing of their home and the offers that they accept on their home, which then makes sellers feel like they're being pushed against the wall, and that buyers have more control over the sellers, which make them feel like it's a buyer's market. Additionally, sellers are having to compromise on things such as repairs and closing costs in order to sell their homes, which again, to sellers or others who are just watching the market, as they're watching the compromises that sellers have to make in order to sell their homes, they're interpreting that as buyers having more control again. But in reality, these types of negotiations are very normal in everyday real estate transactions. I think the problem is that we have a lot of new coming buyers in the marketplace, or people that are buying homes for the first time, and actually all they have to go by is what has happened in the last 2 to 3 years when they probably started watching the market. So they're not used to seeing these types of negotiations happen, and they're used to seeing a listing go on the market, overpriced, and then generating multiple offers, no repairs, no appraisals. So they're really just immature in their thoughts and their knowledge of the real estate transaction and what an actual transaction looks like. But there are less buyers out there. I do understand that. There is some truth to that. My best guess for the reason of this is due to buyer frustration, buyer burnout, and also rising interest rates, which can actually price people right out of the market. For every 1% the interest rate goes up, a buyer loses 10% of buying power. So for many buyers, they can no longer get the house that they want or need, so they get very frustrated and just throw in the towel and say forget the whole thing. One of the biggest problems with sellers right now is that many of them are very used to the equity runs that they were getting in 2020 and 2021. But that rapid increase in equity is definitely an anomaly and not characteristic of a normal market. All of that was due to our country going into a pandemic. I mean, honestly, how many times have you ever seen in your lifetime an equity run at the pace that we just saw over the last 3 years? I'm not going to go into great detail over it, but if you're interested, I highly recommend you go do some research on your own. Look at the rate in equity increases over the last 50 years, say, and see for yourself that over 2020 and 2021, that was completely an anomaly. For it to repeat itself will be many years ahead. So back to why so many people are interpreting this as a buyer's market. Because the pace at which the equity was growing has now slowed down, and people are having to correct their pricing. So people are automatically assuming the sky is falling, and we are falling all the way back to 2008 market conditions. In Las Vegas, we have just reached the amount of inventory needed to be considered a balanced market. As of mid-November, which is when I'm recording this video, we currently have 189 days of inventory on our market. A balanced market is a 6-month inventory, which would translate into 180 days, which is how we are now entering a balanced market. Here, typically, starting in mid-November to the beginning of the next year, we see a complete market slowdown. Usually, the only people who are making offers in this time period are people who absolutely have to move. Military people, deaths in the family, divorce, getting married, having twins, something of that nature. But it's definitely an as-need basis during these 2 months. So with all that said, it's very important for sellers to understand that they must be very strategic in the pricing of their listing before it goes live on the market. While you can always aim high when pricing your home and plan to do strategic price adjustments, in my opinion, it's better to price your home properly for market conditions and get a big number of showings, possibly get a full list price offer for your home, than having to price your house high and chase the market, because that just ends up frustrating buyers. Ultimately, your listing ends up sitting on the market longer that way. What I'm actually seeing when you have a scenario like I just described, where the seller is chasing the market with the pricing, what happens is the buyers get really frustrated. They think the seller is greedy and they just refuse to even write an offer. I've actually had my own listings where I know they're overpriced, but the seller insists on pricing high. And every time I show that home, I try to convince the agent to convince their buyer, just write an offer. Even if it's low, give the seller something to start with to negotiate on. But the buyer ultimately never wants to write the offer because A, they don't want to offend the seller by undercutting their list price too much, even though the seller knows they've overlisted, or B, they just get annoyed that the fact the seller is being greedy and they say, we'll move on. Now let's talk about the details. When I first walk into a listing appointment, I like to have the seller take me through the house on a tour. And as I walk through the house, I like to look at the seller's house through the eyes of a buyer. Remember, a buyer is going to walk through your house and look at all of the monetary items that they need to improve upon in order to make the house more like theirs or in better working condition. Additionally, when buyers walk through a house and the house is not cared for properly or clean, it really turns buyers away. And I've even seen some buyers walk right out the front door uninterested in your listing. They won't even take another step to look at any other part of the house if they start getting the feel that house has not been cared for at all. I once had a listing where the seller refused to do anything to prepare the house for selling it. They were hoarders and the house hadn't been cleaned in years. I think they had lived in the house for about 7 years, and the last time it was probably cleaned was 7 years ago. The air filters were so dirty that there were dust balls falling from the grates. They ran a drop shipping business out of their home, so they had piles and piles of clothes everywhere. Their pool turned green. Their shower was so dirty, and when I say it was dirty, the clear glass was obscure. You couldn't even see through it because there was so much soap scum. They had multiple light bulbs burnt out. The primary closet didn't even have a functioning light bulb, and it was a beautiful walk-in closet that was completely finished, but buyers couldn't even see inside of it. And by the way, no one even wanted to walk through the bathroom to get to the closet because the bathroom was that disgusting. I offered several times to bring someone in to pack up the house to declutter it, and I also offered to have a housekeeper come in and clean it. But the seller insisted it was fine and the house would sell for the dollar amount that they wanted, which, by the way, was $350,000 over the price that I suggested. On top of all of that, the seller insisted on staying home during all showings, him and 4 dogs. And I forgot to mention that one of the rooms where they let the dogs run, I guess, had dried urine all over the floor, and it just smelled horrible. And the room was already stacked boxes, like floor to ceiling, wall to wall. It was just a terrible experience for any buyer to walk through. And of course, like I said, seller was home each and every time, which, by the way, can I tell you, do not ever stay at home during a showing. Buyers do not have the ability to make a house their own in their own mind while the seller is lurking around. Additionally, if a buyer's walking through your house and they're really interested, they want to open doors, drawers, cabinets, and they want to feel comfortable doing that. And they definitely do not feel comfortable having you walk around peering behind corners to see what you might be doing or saying. And if the interior of the house wasn't bad enough, all buyers were greeted upon entry with a sign at his front door that said he would shoot anyone that entered. I can't make this stuff up. This was definitely a recipe for disaster on a listing. The biggest piece of advice I have for sellers is to remember, we live in a house one way, but we prepare our house to sell in a completely different way. Of course, just like the seller, everyone has their own prerogative to do as much or as little to prepare their listing for sale. But it will come back to bite you. This house never sold, like I thought it never would. But asking premium prices for something that is junkyard quality is very unrealistic, and it's super unrealistic when you're in a balanced market or a buyer's market. And sadly, this house was actually in a perfect, highly sought after location, and no matter what I did to market it, there was just no way that I could sell it. The minute people walked up to the front door, they were turned off, and I could tell, and there was nothing I could do as an agent to help sell this property anymore. The rule of thumb is if you have 10 showings but don't even get one offer, you really need to check your pricing and make sure it is in fair market value. So cleanliness is definitely something that's very important when thinking about listing your home. The first thing I like to do is recommend that my clients do a full decluttering and remove all personalized and personal photos and items off of walls and counters and desks and things of that sort. This helps buyers visualize the space as their own. Another very important thing that will help buyers visualize the space as their own is making sure that you, the seller, are not present during any showings. It's also very difficult for buyers to talk amongst themselves about their likes and dislikes, or where they might put a couch or remove a wall if they think you're listening to them. That's also why we highly recommend not having video cameras in the house running while you're doing showings, because a lot of buyers are very aware of these cameras and they're afraid to say anything in front of you. So once the decluttering is done, I recommend that you hire a housekeeper and have a full deep cleaning of the house done. Replacing all burnt out light bulbs in the house, including exterior ones, is always a good idea. And having any paint or drywall touch-ups done at this time is also a good idea. Once the interior is all done, we're almost ready to take pictures, but what I like to do is schedule a window cleaning for interior and exterior windows the same day that the photos will be taken. This helps to ensure that a wind or rainstorm won't ruin your clean windows for your photos and videos. There are times that I get some pushback on the cleaning of the windows because not many people clean their windows regularly. Clean windows in photos and videos make a huge difference, and I guarantee you, a buyer might not walk through your house and say, wow, that house really had some clean windows. But if your windows are dirty, I guarantee you they're going to remember that the windows were dirty when they were trying to look from the kitchen into your backyard or see different views that you might have from your house. Those things will come as negative knocks on your listing. So having clean windows is always like a really extra nice little special touch. The first thing that buyers see when they're coming to your house is the front of your house. So you need to make sure that your landscape is properly trimmed, all of the trash and debris is cleaned up. I even like to recommend that the housekeepers clean the exterior of the door so that it's free of dust and that the threshold is not covered in dust as well, because these are the first things that your buyer is going to see, and the most welcoming that they're going to feel is that first step into your home. Making sure all light bulbs inside and out are in working order, and this just helps minimize things that buyers might see and mark as negative towards your listing. There are some times that I actually recommend to my sellers to have an inspection done before they go live on the market and then correct all of the items beforehand. This helps to minimize, again, negative things that need to be renegotiated later. And sometimes when buyers come back and ask for repairs to be done, they'll ask for an amount of money in lieu of the repairs. And when this happens, a lot of times they elevate the cost of those repairs, so it just makes the negotiating a little harder. So if all of those repairs are done and the buyer never knows about them, there's less negotiating needed. By the way, if you're new to my channel, my name is Lisa Lopez and I'm a real estate consultant in the Las Vegas area. I specialize in luxury real estate and I have a passion in helping busy families just like you achieve the American dream of home ownership through my personalized concierge approach to the real estate transaction. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one or about Las Vegas and real estate. Sometimes as a seller, you have to vacate your property upon listing it. And when this happens, there are many times when staging can actually benefit your listing and help you get top dollar for it. Staging actually is when a professional decorator comes in. They normally have an inventory of furniture that they use, but they'll space plan your home and then they'll professionally decorate the main areas to bring the most out of them and make the home feel most inviting. This is super helpful to buyers because a lot of people can't walk into a room, especially if it's empty, and visualize exactly where furniture should be placed or how it may look. Another problem buyers have is a lot of them will look at really large spaces and actually think they're super small. So if there's furniture, it puts things into perspective for them. There is a downside to staging though. One is it cannot be done in an occupied home. And two, as you can imagine, it can be very costly. There are other options like virtual staging, which is a lot less expensive. Virtual staging is where you take a picture, it can be an occupied space or a vacant space, and an editor will go in and edit all the furniture out if it's a decorated space, or if it's vacant, the editor just photoshops in furniture and places it in the areas that needs to be. Sometimes we use this when a listing might have some old furnishings or less than up-to-date furnishings, because you can choose what types of furniture that you want to Photoshop into those virtually staged photos. But as you can imagine, it is much easier and less expensive if you're doing virtually staged photos in a vacant home, because they don't have to remove things out, which can be really difficult at times, especially if there's a lot of small accessory pieces or a lot of things on the walls. I've seen actual staging cost as much as $6,000 for 2 months of furniture rent, and then it's about $2,000 every month after that if you go month to month. But I've seen virtual staging as inexpensive as $55 a photo, depending on if they're removing furniture out of it and then photoshopping in, or if it's a vacant space. As you can see, virtual staging is much more cost effective, but I will say actual staging takes the cake in live showings and any other videos that might be taken in your listing. First and foremost, my biggest piece of advice to sellers when talking about showings is to be flexible and make it available. We all get it. It's a pain in the ass to have your house on the market. Nobody likes to prep their house for a showing. Nobody likes to have to leave their space so that people could come traipse through their house and go through every single one of your bedrooms and put footprints all over your newly vacuumed lines. But if you're not going to make your house available, then why do you even have it on the market? Prior to each showing, it's super important to remember that we live in a house one way, but we prepare it to show in a different way. So you're going to want to go back through before every single showing and declutter every countertop in your house. I totally get how frustrating this is, because I have owned several houses and 6 of them I had to sell while I was raising 4 little kids. So I always had a little trick. Every time I knew I was going to list my house, I picked a drawer and a cabinet downstairs and a drawer and a cabinet upstairs. And when I would have to declutter the countertops for a showing, I would just throw everything into those drawers and cabinets. Well, inevitably, those drawers got full and I had to move on to other drawers. So this was always really fun when it came to actually packing up the house, because it was like Christmas in July. I would just find all kinds of things that I lost along the way during showings. But it's always good practice to have a place throughout your house to hide everything before a showing, because clean countertops allow buyers to visualize their stuff and make that space their own. Something to always keep in mind as well is that buyers are nosy, so you're going to want to put your stuff away. I've watched buyers look at people's desks to look at the mail, to see whose house they're in, to see if they can see how much their bills are, all kinds of different things. You do not want to keep your stuff out. The things that I hear buyers say about sellers' items are unreal. So just make it good practice to put everything away. So after you declutter your countertops, there are some cleanliness things you're going to want to do before every showing. Some of these are common sense, but I'm just going to go over them anyway. So first, you're going to want to make sure your sink does not have any dirty dishes. Go ahead and wash them all and put them away, because no buyer wants to walk by their soon-to-be kitchen and see a bunch of dirty dishes with dried up food from the homeowner sitting in it. You should also make sure all the beds are made. And like I said, if you have time, it's always a nice special touch to put vacuum lines in the carpets. And another little touch I always like to recommend to my sellers who prep their own homes before showings, which is rare in my situation because I like to be present at my showings, but I recommend that you put down all your toilet seats. Another thing buyers don't want to see is inside your toilet when they are looking inside your bathroom. Another thing I really want to touch on are scents. There is an overwhelming consensus that you should make your house smell as welcoming and as inviting as possible. Now, that sometimes is taken to the extreme. And I've been in some houses where literally I walk out and my hair and my clothes smell like I wore their home fragrance for my perfume. This is not what we mean when we say make sure your house smells good. Maybe light a candle or open the doors to let some fresh air in and air out any foul smells. You also have to be equally as cautious to not have overpowering scents, even if they're good scents. The goal during a showing is to keep the buyer in your house as long as possible and make it as comfortable as possible, making sure the temperature is right, making sure your scents aren't overpowering. Soft music in the background is also a nice touch, but make sure that as well is not overpowering. I've seen some sellers turn their music on so loud because they're trying to either drown out traffic noise in the background, or maybe they just enjoy loud music. But I will tell you, if it's annoying to a buyer, they will not spend the time that they want in your house and they will end the showing early. I've seen it happen a million times. You don't want to have anything offensive or annoying to a buyer. There are some additional special touches that I like to do for my personal listings and my clients' listings. I like to recommend to have some fresh flowers out. Live plants are also really nice touches to have. And if you're responsible for preparing your own listing for a showing, make sure you turn on all lights, open all window coverings. I like to recommend that you open all interior doors because sometimes buyers are afraid to open doors that are closed, especially in occupied homes. So these are a few things that I like to do to my listings, and I think they're very helpful. And I highly recommend that if you're responsible for showing your home, that you prepare your listing this way as well. If you're a seller and don't have an agent, I can actually help you buy and sell real estate all over the world. If you're interested, make sure you text me or leave me an email in the description below so that we can chat about your goals and see what we can do about reaching them. Some other things to consider would be offering some incentives, such as money towards closing costs or a 2-1 rate buy down. So you might be asking yourself, what exactly is a 2-1 rate buy down? A rate buy down is essentially where anyone in the situation, but in this particular scenario, you, the seller, are going to pay for the buyer's rate buy down. If you're doing a 2-1 rate buy down, say like the interest rate is 6%, you're going to buy that rate down the first year to 4%, which is the 2% buy down. And then in the second year, you're gonna buy it down 1%. So that goes to 5%. So year one, the buyer is paying essentially a 4% interest rate on their loan. Year two, they're paying a 5% interest rate on their loan. And year three, it goes up to the going rate at that time, 6% in this scenario. As you can see, this can be really beneficial to the buyer and help with the buyer's affordability in this market where buyers are getting priced out all the time. So the way this helps buyers with affordability is because as interest rates rise, it impacts the purchasing power that they have to buy a home. By raising the cost and limiting how much the buyer can comfortably afford. So let me break this down for you. Let's assume your buyer is going to buy your $400,000 home. If your buyer is trying to keep their mortgage payment in the range of $2,500 to $2,600 and interest rates rise as they're shopping, they can no longer afford your $400,000 home. So in order to meet their payment goal, they have to reduce the amount of home they're searching for. Generally speaking, remember I said for every 1% interest rates go up, buyers lose 10% affordability. Some may not realize just how much different that makes, but let's say you're buying that $400,000 home and the interest rate is 6%. That house payment with principal and interest should be somewhere around $2,398. But let's say that rate of 6% jumps up to 7%. So now that means they can no longer afford your $400,000 home and they need to change their price to $360,000. That's a $40,000 difference in affordability for someone who can't stretch their budget. A $40,000 drop in a list price can cost a buyer lots of things. It could cost them the number of bedrooms they have, the location they want to be in. It can even cost them being in the market at all. I've seen some buyers completely exit and decide to stay put where they're at because they can no longer afford what they actually need. Say like you're needing a 4-bedroom and the 4-bedroom is $400,000 and the rates go up to 7% and all that is in the $360,000 price range in the location they need are 3 bedrooms and below. So this is how buyers are getting priced out of the market due to the higher interest rates. For this reason, that's how a 2-1 buy down can be a very effective selling tool for sellers, because now you've got buyers who can afford your home, and for a very small price to the seller, it's a very effective bottom line to the buyer. Now let's break down what that 2-1 buy down is going to cost you as the seller. All right, let's take that $400,000 house that we're going to assume the buyer's not going to put anything down just to keep numbers rounded and even. So that's a loan of $400,000. Now let's say their rate is that same 6% we discussed a minute ago, and you're going to do a 2-1 buy down. So what you're going to do is you take $400,000 and multiply that by 2%, and that's $8,000, which is the cost of year 1 of buy downs. That's your 2% buy down for year 1 payments. Then let's table that $8,000 for a second. And now we're gonna take that same $400,000 and multiply it by 1%, which is $4,000. And then you're going to take that $8,000 that we tabled and the $4,000 and we're gonna add them together, which equals $12,000. You've now had to pay $12,000 towards the buyer's buy down at time of close of escrow, and it has essentially saved the buyer $8,868 worth of payments for 2 years of their loan. And you've afforded them the time to ride the wave of the higher interest rates. Hopefully by year 3 or any time in between those 3 years, the rates actually start to come down, and at that time the buyer can decide to refinance their loan at the time. Now some of you might be asking if that principal amount comes down when you calculate the second year of buy downs, and the answer is no, because the actual mortgage loan gets casted at the 6%. The seller is not actually buying the rate down. What they do is they calculate the amount of money it would cost to buy the rate down, and that money sits in an impound account with the mortgage company, and each month when the buyer makes their payment, they take a small chunk out of that impound account that the seller provided to provide the difference of payment between 6% and 4% and then 6% and 5%. So essentially you're really not buying the rate down, but you're providing the buyer the payment of a bought down rate. To find out more about listing strategies or real estate in the Las Vegas area, click one of the video cards around me. And until then, thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time I drop a new video. See you on the next one.